The sounds of war were still heavy in the air, gunfire distant but present, the hum of helicopters far off on rescue missions, the sharp, acrid smell of smoke and metal all around. But here, in the small makeshift medical tent set up on the outskirts of the combat zone, everything was quieter, suspended in a fragile bubble of survival. The constant sounds of war created a kind of tension in the air that was impossible to ignore. The distant gunfire reminded everyone that danger was never far away, that death could arrive at any moment. The helicopters, whirring far above, seemed to symbolize both hope and horror. They were coming to rescue the wounded, but they also brought with them the stark reminder of how many had already fallen. The smell of burning fuel and hot metal filled the air, mixing with the dust of the battlefield. Yet, in the medical tent, despite being so close to the chaos, there was a strange, almost unnatural calm. The tent was small, simple, and filled with the faint sounds of voices speaking in urgent tones, bandages being torn open, and equipment being arranged for the next round of care. It was a space where survival was the goal, where every breath felt like a fragile hope. It was here, among the dust and smoke, that lives were saved, even if only for a little while. Serena had seen a lot of things in her 10 years as a combat nurse, the carnage, the suffering, the resilience of the human spirit when it was pushed to the edge. But nothing had prepared her for the soldier lying in front of her now. Over the years, Serena had become accustomed to the horrors of war. She had watched soldiers struggle to survive, knowing that the battlefield wasn't just about fighting, it was about enduring the unimaginable. The injuries she had treated were often severe, and the pain of the soldiers was something she had learned to bear as much as they had. She had seen blood-soaked bandages, broken bodies, and souls that had been shattered by the violence of war. But even with all that experience, this young soldier in front of her, Arnold, was different. His wounds were physical and emotional in a way that made her pause. She had been trained to save lives, to stabilize the injured, but his suffering, his haunted eyes and silent pain, made her realize that sometimes, survival didn't just mean healing the body. It meant reaching into a person's soul, helping them carry the weight of everything they had witnessed and lost. And Arnold had clearly lost so much. He was young, perhaps no more than 25, with a face that might have looked boyish in another life. But in this one, it was marked by the deep creases of war, his skin burnt by sun and dirt, his brown eyes hollowed with pain and exhaustion. His name, she had learned, was Arnold. He had been pulled from the jaws of death after being caught in an ambush that decimated his squad. He was one of the lucky ones, they said, if you could call surviving a battlefield lucky. Arnold's face, which could have belonged to a carefree young man in another life, was now marked by the brutality of war. The skin on his face had been darkened by the sun and dirt, giving him an almost unnatural, hardened appearance. His once youthful features were etched with lines of strain and loss. His eyes, deep, brown, and tired, were windows into a soul that had seen far too much. There was nothing left of the boy he might have been, only the man who had survived the impossible. She had learned from his reports that Arnold had been caught in an ambush. His squad had been destroyed, and he had somehow managed to survive, but at a tremendous cost. In this world, where survival often came at the expense of the spirit, Arnold had become one of the lucky ones, but Serena wasn't sure how anyone could consider surviving such horrors to be lucky. It felt more like a cruel twist of fate. Serena had heard the reports. He'd been left behind, presumed dead after a blast tore apart his position. But Arnold had fought through the blackness of shock, had crawled, dragged himself for miles to reach the medics, surviving not just the battlefield but a storm of psychological and physical trauma. He'd survived because he had no other choice. The reports about Arnold had painted a grim picture. After the explosion, his squad had been decimated, and he was believed to be among the fallen. But somehow, against all odds, he had survived. His survival wasn't just due to physical endurance. It was the result of a powerful, almost desperate will to live. Despite being injured, disoriented, and in shock, Arnold had crawled, dragged himself across the battlefield for miles, determined to find help. His survival was more than just a physical victory, it was a testament to his strength of mind. He had fought through the blackness of shock and the overwhelming pain that would have caused most to give up. And yet, despite all he had endured, he wasn't out of the woods yet. His wounds were deep, not just in his body but in his mind, and that was a battle Serena wasn't sure he could win alone. When she first saw him, he was barely conscious, his body a mangled tapestry of injuries, shrapnel embedded in his side, burns on his arms, and a deep gash on his forehead. She'd had to stabilize him quickly, running through the motions of her training almost mechanically. But when she looked at him again, when he opened his eyes briefly, something happened. For a moment, in those tired brown eyes, she saw something more than just a soldier. She saw the weight of everything he had endured, the silent scream of a soul that had borne witness to horrors that no one should ever have to face. Serena had worked quickly when Arnold first arrived, performing the necessary procedures to stabilize his condition. Her training kicked in, and she moved with precision, keeping her focus solely on saving his life. His body was battered and broken, and the injuries were severe, but she didn't have time to dwell on the extent of his pain. She had seen worse, had treated worse, and had learned to shut off the emotional reactions that might slow her down. But when Arnold's eyes opened, even for a brief moment, it stopped her in her tracks. The look in his eyes was unlike any soldier she had ever treated. It wasn't just the exhaustion or the confusion that so often clouded the eyes of the injured. It was something deeper. There was a weight in his gaze, a heaviness that spoke of suffering, loss, and a kind of silence that was almost unbearable. In that brief moment, Serena realized that Arnold wasn't just another soldier she was trying to save. He was a person, a human being, and what he had endured was more than just physical trauma. It was the emotional scars that would take far longer to heal. "You're safe now," she had whispered, more to herself than him, as she started her work to patch him up. The words came out softly, almost without thought. It was something she said to every soldier she treated, a small comfort, a reassurance. "You're safe now" was a phrase that she used to help ground them, to let them know they had made it out of the immediate danger. But with Arnold, those words felt different. She wasn't just telling him that he was no longer in immediate danger. She was trying to tell him that he had made it through something far worse than physical injury, that despite everything he had been through, he was still here. She needed him to hear that, to believe it. It wasn't just the words of a nurse, it was a message from one person to another. It was an affirmation that he mattered, that his survival had meaning, that there was something worth fighting for. She wasn't sure if he could hear her or understand what she was trying to say. But in that moment, with the weight of his trauma pressing in on both of them, Serena hoped that maybe, just maybe, he would hold on to those words, even if just for a little while. The days that followed blurred together. The air in the field hospital was thick with exhaustion and fear, but Serena's world shrank down to just him. Arnold. The chaos of the war seemed to fade into the background as Serena focused on one patient, Arnold. The routine of treating wounds, administering medications, and helping soldiers regain some sense of strength became a blur of movements and actions. But every day, her attention would return to Arnold, to the quiet man lying in front of her, his body healing but his mind still fractured. The field hospital, filled with the sounds of soldiers in pain and the steady hum of medical equipment, faded into the background for her. She had seen countless others in pain, but with Arnold, it felt different. There was something about him that pulled at her, something that made her stay with him longer than necessary, something that made her care more than she should. She saw the struggle in his eyes, the fight to hold on to whatever remnants of himself were left after everything he had endured. In a place where survival was the only goal, Serena found herself emotionally tethered to him in a way that was unexpected and unsettling.